The hunter and the prey. The dim glow of a distant star cast long shadows over the desolate landscape of Arkan Station, a forgotten outpost on the fringes of a contested galactic sector. For centuries, this barren wasteland had been little more than a backdrop for humanity's battles with the relentless alien coalition known as the Kirin Pact. Among its ranks was Vexera, a hunter bred for one purpose: to eliminate threats to her people. Her breathing was steady, her focus razor-sharp as she crouched behind the jagged remains of a towering structure. Once, this had been a bustling command center, filled with the hum of human ingenuity. Now, it was a skeletal monument to the devastation of war. Vexera's scales shimmered faintly in the moonlight, adapting to the environment to blend seamlessly with the ruins around her. Every breath was controlled, every movement calculated. She was an apex predator. And tonight, her prey was human. Her mission was clear: infiltrate, retrieve, and destroy. The humans had developed a device, one capable of turning the tide of the war. Her task was to ensure it never saw the light of day. With her keen senses and natural stealth, she had made it past the outer defenses with little trouble. But something about this assignment felt different. The humans had anticipated her kind before, but never with such precision. It was as if they knew she would come. A faint crunch of debris snapped her out of her thoughts. She froze, her twin hearts pounding as her eyes scanned the darkness. The sound was faint, but to Vexera's honed senses, it was a warning. Someone was near. And then she saw him. The human moved with an ease that unsettled her, his steps deliberate and quiet. He was tall, his silhouette marked by the telltale bulk of combat armor. In one hand, he carried a rifle, its barrel glowing faintly with energy, a weapon designed to pierce even the toughest Kirin armor. His other hand rested loosely by his side, as if he wasn't concerned about the danger lurking just meters away. Vexera narrowed her eyes. This wasn't the erratic, brutish behavior she had come to expect from humans. This one was different. Methodical. Precise. Dangerous. She shifted her weight, preparing to strike if necessary. But then the man stopped. Slowly, he knelt, brushing his gloved fingers over the dusty ground. His helmet tilted slightly, as if he were listening to the whispers of the wind. For a moment, Vexera thought he might look directly at her, but he didn't. Instead, he spoke. "I know you're there." His voice was calm, almost too calm, cutting through the silence like a blade. It wasn't a shout or a command, it was an invitation. Vexera's claws flexed instinctively, the tips grazing the cold surface beneath her. She could kill him now, end this encounter before it began. But something about his tone gave her pause. "I don't want to fight you," he continued, standing slowly. His rifle remained lowered, though Vexera knew it could be raised in an instant. "But I will if I have to." A trick, she thought bitterly. Humans were known for their deceit. But as she studied him, she couldn't detect the usual signs of aggression. He wasn't posturing or calling for reinforcements. He was simply waiting. "Show yourself," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I'm not here to hurt you." The absurdity of his words nearly made her laugh. He was a soldier, and she was the enemy. Yet, there was no malice in his tone, no hatred. Only curiosity. Against her better judgment, Vexera deactivated her cloaking field. The shimmering distortion around her faded, revealing her tall, sleek form. Her emerald scales reflected the pale light, and her piercing yellow eyes locked onto his visor. She stood to her full height, her twin tails curling behind her in a silent warning. If he so much as twitched, she would strike. To her surprise, the human didn't move. He simply tilted his head slightly, as if taking her in. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. Vexera bared her teeth in a sharp, predatory grin. "Neither are you." For a moment, the two stood in silence, the tension between them thick enough to cut. Vexera's mind raced with possibilities. She could lunge, close the distance in a heartbeat, and tear through his armor before he had a chance to react. But something held her back. "Why aren't you attacking me?" she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "Isn't that what your kind does? Kill first, ask questions later?" The human shrugged. I could ask you the same thing. His answer caught her off guard. Humans weren't supposed to act like this. They were supposed to be impulsive, violent, driven by emotion rather than logic. But this one was calm, almost unnervingly so. It unsettled her more than any weapon could have. My name is Captain Elias Ward, he said, breaking the silence. And you are? Vexara's eyes narrowed. I am your enemy. Elias chuckled softly, the sound more amused than mocking. If that's all you are, then why haven't you killed me yet? The question hit harder than Vexara expected. Why hadn't she killed him? It would have been easy, the logical choice. And yet, here she was, standing in the ruins of a human outpost, engaging in a conversation she didn't understand. You're different, Elias said, his tone thoughtful. I've fought your kind before. They don't hesitate. But you're holding back. Vexara felt her twin hearts hammering against her chest. His words felt too close to the truth, and she didn't like it. Don't mistake hesitation for weakness, she snapped. If I wanted you dead, you'd already be. Maybe, Elias replied, his voice steady. Or maybe you're starting to realize that this war isn't as black and white as they've told you. The statement hung in the air, heavier than the silence that followed. For the first time in her life, Vexara found herself questioning her purpose. Was this human truly her enemy, or was there something more to this encounter than she could understand? Elias took a cautious step forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. We don't have to fight, he said. Not here. Not now. Vexara's claws flexed again, but she didn't move. She didn't know why, but she couldn't bring herself to strike. Instead, she watched as the human lowered his rifle completely, slinging it over his shoulder. His movements were deliberate, slow, as if he understood the delicate balance between them. In that moment, something shifted. The hunter and the prey stood on equal ground, caught in a fragile truce neither of them fully understood. And for the first time, Vexara wondered if there was more to humanity and herself than she had ever believed. A reluctant alliance. Vexara's instincts screamed at her to act. A lifetime of training echoed in her mind: terminate the target, complete the mission, retreat to safety. But as Captain Elias Ward stood before her, unarmed and calm, she found herself frozen. The moment stretched like the ruins around them, heavy with tension yet alive with unspoken possibilities. What is it you want, human? She demanded, her voice a sharp hiss cutting through the quiet. Elias's gaze remained steady. I want to stop this madness. I want to understand why we keep tearing each other apart. Vexara blinked, momentarily thrown by his words. She had expected bravado or threats, maybe even a plea for his life. But this was unexpected. Her claws flexed at her sides, their sharp edges catching the faint light, but she didn't raise them. You think words will end this war, she retorted, her twin tails twitching in agitation. Your kind has spilled as much blood as mine. Elias nodded, his expression somber. You're right. We're both guilty. But someone has to start questioning why. If not me, then who? Vexara narrowed her eyes, suspicion lacing her thoughts. And you think that someone is you? Maybe, he said with a shrug. Or maybe it's you. The absurdity of his statement made her laugh, a harsh sound that echoed off the crumbling walls around them. You're a fool, human. Maybe, he said again, his tone unshaken. But I'm alive. And so are you. Her laughter faded, replaced by a simmering frustration she couldn't quite place. This human wasn't behaving like any she'd encountered before. He wasn't cowering or posturing, and he wasn't trying to outmaneuver her. Instead, he stood there, speaking to her as if they were equals. It unnerved her more than any weapon ever could. I should kill you, she said, her voice low and dangerous. But you won't, Elias replied calmly. Vexara stiffened. Don't test me. I'm not, he said, his voice soft but firm. I'm trusting you. The words struck her like a blow. Trust. It was a concept foreign to her people. The Kirin were bred for efficiency, for survival, for war. Trust was a weakness, an unnecessary luxury in a galaxy that valued strength above all else.
And yet, here was this human, offering her something she didn't understand.
Before she could respond, a low rumble shook the ground beneath them. Both of their heads snapped toward the horizon, where a plume of smoke was rising in the distance. The faint hum of engines followed, growing louder with each passing second.
Reinforcements, Elias muttered, his hand instinctively moving toward his rifle. Vexura's heart quickened. If more humans were approaching, her chances of survival would plummet. She could take down Elias, but against an entire squad, even her superior training wouldn't be enough. Her mission was already in jeopardy. You led them here, she hissed, her claws extending once more. No, Elias said quickly, raising a hand to placate her. They don't know you're here. But if we don't move, they will.
For a moment, Vexura considered her options. She could kill him now, eliminate the immediate threat, and try to escape before the reinforcements arrived. But the thought of leaving him behind, of not understanding why he had spoken to her the way he had not at her. Against all logic, she made a decision that shocked even herself. Fine, she said, her voice tight with reluctance. But if this is a trick, I'll kill you where you stand.
Elias didn't argue.
Instead, he motioned for her to follow, moving with the same quiet precision that had unnerved her earlier. Together, they slipped through the ruins, their movements synchronized despite their differences. Vexura found herself studying him as they moved, the way his body seemed to flow with practiced ease, the way he scanned their surroundings with an almost predatory awareness. He wasn't like the other humans she had fought. He was more. They reached a narrow alleyway, hidden between the remnants of two collapsed buildings. Elias motioned for her to stop, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his knife. He peered around the corner, his posture tense.
They're sweeping the area, he murmured. Standard search pattern. We need to move fast. Vexura arched a brow. You expect me to trust your strategy?
Elias glanced back at her, his lips twitching into the faintest hint of a smile.
Do you have a better idea?
She didn't respond, but the truth was evident in her silence. Her cloaking device was still offline, and the human reinforcements were too close for her to risk engaging them. For the first time in her life, she was at the mercy of another, and that other was a human. As they moved deeper into the ruins, the hum of engines grew louder. Vexura's sharp ears picked up the distant chatter of voices, their words indistinct but their urgency clear.
The humans were closing in.
This way, Elias said, leading her toward a crumbled staircase that descended into darkness.
Vexura hesitated.
The stairs led into an underground passage, one that could easily become a trap.
But with the reinforcements closing in, she didn't have much choice.
With a low growl, she followed him. The passage was damp and narrow, the air thick with the scent of decay. Vexura's senses were on high alert, her eyes scanning every shadow for signs of danger. Elias moved ahead of her, his footsteps nearly silent despite the weight of his armor. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged into a small chamber. It was a maintenance hub, its walls lined with rusting panels and flickering screens. Elias crouched near one of the panels, tapping at its controls.
What are you doing? Vexura demanded.
Setting a distraction, he replied without looking up. If they think we're still topside, they'll waste time searching while we figure out our next move. The logic was sound, but Vexura still felt a pang of unease.
And what is our next move, human?
Elias glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable behind his visor.
That depends on you.
The simplicity of his answer caught her off guard. She had expected him to take charge, to dictate their course of action. Instead, he was deferring to her, giving her the choice. You're strange, human, she muttered, her voice laced with suspicion.
Maybe, he said with a shrug. Or maybe I just see something worth fighting for.
The words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Vexura didn't know what to make of them, but for the first time, she felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Not trust, but something close. As the distant sounds of the search party began to fade, Vexura realized that her mission had taken a turn she could never have predicted.
The human before her was no longer just a target or an enemy. He was something else entirely. And that terrified her, the enemy within.
The silence of the underground chamber wrapped around them like a suffocating shroud. Vexera's sharp eyes darted around the dimly lit space, every flickering shadow a potential threat. She wasn't used to this, being cornered, relying on another for survival. Her mission was already off track, and she hated the feeling of being out of control. Elias worked swiftly at the console, his hands steady despite the tension crackling in the air. Vexera observed him closely, her instincts on high alert. He was efficient, deliberate. Too deliberate. Every action felt intentional, like he was hiding something. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that his calm demeanor was genuine. "You seem too comfortable down here," she said, her voice low and edged with suspicion.
"Almost like you've done this before."
Elias glanced over his shoulder, offering her a faint smirk.
"Let's just say this isn't my first time in a tight spot." She didn't return his smile. "How do I know you're not leading me into a trap?"
"You don't," he replied, turning back to the console. "But if I wanted to kill you, I had plenty of chances topside."
"You're alive because I don't see the point in us killing each other."
Vexera's claws flexed, her muscles coiled like a spring ready to snap. "Your naivety will get you killed one day, human." "Maybe," Elias said, his voice calm, almost amused.
"But not today."
The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Vexera hated how steady he was, how he seemed unfazed by the situation. Humans were supposed to be impulsive, unpredictable. This one was different, and that difference made her uneasy. A faint hum from the console broke her thoughts.
Elias straightened, stepping back to inspect his work.
"There.
That should give us some breathing room. I've set a false heat signature near the surface. With any luck, they'll spend the next hour chasing ghosts." "An hour?"
Vexera folded her arms, her twin tails curling behind her in agitation.
"And what happens after that?" "They won't stop hunting me."
Elias shrugged, leaning against the console.
"Then we find another way. Together."
The word hung in the air like a challenge. Vexera narrowed her eyes, her sharp gaze fixed on him.
"Together? You expect me to trust you?"
"No," he said simply.
"I expect you to make a choice.
Keep running alone, or take a chance and see where this goes." Her lips curled into a sneer.
"Humans and Karen don't work together. We kill each other. That's all we know."
"Maybe it's time we learn something new," Elias countered, his tone steady but firm. The simplicity of his words unsettled her. For all her training, all the missions she had completed with cold precision, Vexera had never encountered a human like this. He wasn't trying to dominate or manipulate her. He was offering her something she didn't fully understand: a partnership, an alternative to the endless cycle of violence.
But could she trust him? Did she even want to? Vexera's thoughts were interrupted by a faint rumble in the distance. The search party was still active, their presence a constant reminder of the danger closing in around them.
She couldn't afford to hesitate much longer. "What's your plan, human?" she asked, her voice sharp.
"You seem awfully confident for someone standing next to their enemy."
Elias met her gaze, his expression unreadable behind his visor.
"We're only enemies if we choose to be." She laughed bitterly.
Spoken like someone who's never faced the consequences of their choices. His posture stiffened slightly, and for the first time, Vexera saw a flicker of something beneath his calm exterior.
Pain. Regret.
"Don't mistake me for someone untouched by this war," he said quietly.
"I've lost people, friends, family. I know what this fight has cost. That's why I'm here."
She tilted her head, studying him.
"And why are you here, really? What are you after?"
Elias hesitated, his gaze dropping for a moment before he met her eyes again.
"I'm after something better. Something that doesn't end with us wiping each other out."
His words stirred something deep within her, something she didn't want to acknowledge. The Karen were bred for war, their purpose clear and unwavering.
But for the first time, Vexera found herself questioning that purpose. What if there was more to life than survival and victory? What if there was another way? She shook the thought from her mind, her voice sharp. Idealism won't save you, human. It won't save anyone. Maybe not, Elias admitted. But it's better than the alternative.
The distant rumble grew louder, the sound of engines echoing through the underground chamber.
They didn't have much time.
Vexera felt her claws twitch, her instincts urging her to act.
But what was the right move?
Killing Elias would solve nothing, and running alone would only delay the inevitable. Against her better judgment, she made her decision.
Fine, she said, her voice low but firm. We work together. But if you betray me... I won't, Elias interrupted, his tone resolute. You have my word. Vexera scoffed. Your word means nothing to me.
Then let my actions speak for themselves, he said. She didn't respond, but the unspoken agreement hung heavy between them.
For now, their fates were intertwined, their survival dependent on a fragile alliance neither fully trusted.
As they prepared to move, Vexera couldn't shake the feeling that this human was more dangerous than any enemy she had ever faced, not because of his strength or skill, but because of the questions he made her ask. For the first time in her life, Vexera wondered if she had been wrong.
About humans. About herself. About everything.
And that terrified her more than any weapon ever could.
A new perspective.
The underground tunnels were a labyrinth of shadows and echoes, the distant hum of engines above serving as a constant reminder of the pursuit closing in. Vexera moved with calculated precision, her emerald scales shimmering faintly in the dim light of the passageway.
She followed Elias, his tall frame illuminated by the occasional flicker of his helmet's interface.
Every step he took was deliberate, as if he was aware of the trust she had begrudgingly extended to him. Elias slowed his pace and glanced back at her.
You're quiet.
Vexera arched a brow, her twin tails curling behind her.
Would you prefer I chatter like one of your kind? A faint chuckle escaped him.
No, but I'm guessing there's a lot going on in that head of yours. She narrowed her eyes.
Don't assume you know me, human.
Fair, he said, his voice calm.
But if we're going to survive this, you might want to start talking. Silence won't save us.
Vexera hissed softly, her claws flexing against the damp walls as they moved deeper into the tunnels.
What do you expect me to say? That I trust you? That I believe we're on the same side? We're not. Not yet, Elias said with an irritatingly calm tone. But I'm betting you're smart enough to see that killing each other isn't the solution here.
She wanted to argue, to remind him of the centuries of bloodshed between their species, but the words wouldn't come.
Instead, she pressed forward, her focus shifting to the environment around them.
The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, its walls lined with rusting pipes and ancient conduits. Water dripped from the ceiling, pooling on the uneven ground in a quiet rhythm. Elias motioned for her to stop, raising a hand as he scanned the area with a small handheld device. A soft beep confirmed what she already suspected: they weren't alone.
What is it? She whispered, her voice sharp. Heat signatures, Elias murmured. 3, maybe 4. Could be a scouting party.
Vexera's claws extended instinctively, the familiar weight of impending combat settling over her. She glanced at Elias, her voice a low growl.
You said your diversion would keep them away.
I said it might give us time, he corrected.
Looks like they're more persistent than I thought.
Her eyes glinted with a dangerous light.
Then we kill them. Elias shook his head. Not unless we have to. If they report back, we're done.
Vexera hissed in frustration but held her ground.
Then what's your plan?
He tapped the device on his wrist, pulling up a holographic map of the tunnels. There's an access hatch about 200 meters ahead. If we can make it there without drawing attention, we can bypass the patrol.
And if we can't, she asked, her voice laced with skepticism.
Then we improvise, Elias said, his gaze steady.
But I'm not leaving you behind.
The sincerity in his words caught her off guard, and she hated the way it unsettled her.
She had been trained to see humans as enemies, obstacles to be eliminated.
Yet here was one who spoke of loyalty, of cooperation, as if they were more than just adversaries. It was disarming in a way she couldn't fully understand. "Let's move," she said finally, her tone clipped. "Before I regret this." They moved quickly but quietly, their footsteps muffled against the damp floor. The heat signatures grew faint as they put distance between themselves and the patrol, but Vexera remained on edge. Her sharp senses picked up every creak, every shift in the air, her body coiled and ready to strike at a moment's notice. As they approached the access hatch, Elias paused, his hand resting on the rusted metal wheel that sealed it shut. "Help me with this," he said, nodding toward the mechanism. Vexera frowned but stepped forward, her claws digging into the grooves as she applied her strength. The wheel groaned in protest, the sound echoing through the chamber like a warning. They both froze, listening for any signs of movement. "Keep going," Elias urged, his voice barely above a whisper. With a final heave, the wheel turned, and the hatch creaked open. A rush of stale air greeted them, and Vexera wrinkled her nose at the musty scent. They slipped through the opening, Elias pulling the hatch closed behind them with a soft click. The new passage was narrower, the walls covered in layers of grime and rust. Vexera glanced at Elias, her voice low. "This better lead somewhere useful." "It will," he said, his confidence unwavering. "Just stay close." She followed him, her sharp gaze scanning the shadows for any signs of danger. The tension between them was palpable, a fragile truce that could shatter at any moment. And yet, for reasons she couldn't explain, she found herself trusting him if only slightly. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged into another chamber. This one was larger, its walls lined with dormant machinery and stacks of crates. Elias approached one of the crates, prying it open to reveal a cache of supplies, food, water, and medical kits. "Looks like we're in luck," he said, tossing a small ration pack her way. Vexera caught it, her eyes narrowing. "You humans really do love stockpiling." "Survival instinct," Elias replied, tearing open a pack of his own. "Not so different from your kind, I'd guess." She didn't respond, her attention shifting to the contents of the crate. As much as she hated to admit it, the supplies would buy them time to plan their next move, time to figure out what came next. Elias sat on the edge of a crate, his helmet resting beside him. For the first time, Vexera saw his face, a sharp jawline, dark eyes that carried a weight she recognized all too well. He looked tired. Worn. Yet there was a quiet strength in his expression that unsettled her. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly, her voice softer than she intended. Elias met her gaze, his brow furrowing slightly. "Doing what?" "Helping me," she said. "You could have left me to die back there. It would have been easier." He leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe. But I've seen enough death. Enough destruction. If there's even a chance we can change that even a little, I have to try." Vexera studied him, her mind racing with questions she didn't know how to ask. This human wasn't like the others she had encountered. He didn't just fight to survive, he fought for something more. And for the first time, she wondered if she could do the same. "Your optimism is dangerous," she said finally, her tone laced with skepticism. "Maybe," Elias said with a faint smile. "But it's better than the alternative." As the silence settled between them, Vexera felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't trust, not yet. But it was a start. And in this war-torn galaxy, that was more than she ever thought possible. Shadows of betrayal. The stillness of the underground chamber was deceptive, a fragile bubble of quiet amidst the chaos of war. Vexera leaned against the cold metal wall, her sharp gaze never leaving Elias as he sorted through the supplies they had found. Despite the uneasy alliance they had formed, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling of doubt clawing at the edges of her mind. "You seem too prepared for this," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "What's your real plan, human?" Elias glanced up, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "My real plan? Stay alive long enough to figure out what comes next." Her twin tails flicked behind her, a sign of her growing frustration. "Don't toy with me.
You expect me to believe you're just stumbling around these tunnels without a larger goal?
He stood, his dark eyes meeting hers with a calm intensity.
I'm not stumbling. But I don't have all the answers, either. Right now, surviving is the best I can offer. Vexara's lips curled into a sneer. Your kind always has a hidden agenda. You say you want peace, but I've seen what humans are capable of. And I've seen what your kind can do, Elias replied evenly, his tone steady. But we're here, aren't we? Talking instead of fighting. That has to count for something.
She wanted to argue, to remind him of the destruction his species had wrought across the galaxy. But the truth was, she couldn't deny the strange reality of their situation. For all her training, for all her instincts, she hadn't killed him. And he hadn't killed her. That unsettled her more than anything. The past comes calling. The moment of uneasy silence was shattered by the faint crackle of a comm device. Elias stiffened, pulling a small transmitter from his belt. Vexara tensed, her claws flexing instinctively as her sharp ears picked up a garbled voice through the static. Ward, are you there? Report. Elias's jaw tightened, and he turned away from her, pressing the device closer to his ear. I'm here. What's your status? The voice demanded. We lost track of the target in the lower sectors. Command wants an update. Vexara's eyes narrowed. Target. They were talking about her. She stepped closer, her movements silent as she loomed behind him. Are you leading them to me? She hissed, her voice low and venomous. Elias turned, his expression calm but serious. No. Then why are they still looking for me? She demanded, her claws glinting in the faint light. You said we had time. I'm buying us time, he said firmly. Trust me. Trust? She scoffed, her voice dripping with scorn. Your words mean nothing. Elias raised his hands, his calm demeanor unwavering despite the tension radiating from her. If I wanted to betray you, I wouldn't still be standing here. The logic of his words grated against her pride, but she couldn't ignore their truth. Slowly, reluctantly, she lowered her claws, though her muscles remained taut with readiness. He turned back to the comm device. Negative on the target. I'm securing the lower sectors and will report if I find anything. The voice on the other end hesitated before replying. Understood. Keep us updated. Command wants this one alive. Elias shut off the device and turned to face Vexara, his expression unreadable. They think I'm still searching. That gives us an advantage. She studied him, her sharp gaze searching for any hint of deception. Why didn't you tell them the truth? Because I don't want them to find you, he said simply. Vexara's tails flicked behind her, her frustration mounting. Why? Elias sighed, leaning against the nearest wall. Because if they do, this ends in blood. And I'm tired of blood. The fragile truce. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with the weight of unspoken questions and unacknowledged truths. Vexara crossed her arms, her claws retracting as she leaned back against the opposite wall. You're risking a lot for someone you don't know, she said finally, her tone softer but still wary. I know enough, Elias replied. I know you're not like the others I've fought. She arched a brow, her sharp features tilting in curiosity. What makes you so sure? You had every chance to kill me, he said, his dark eyes meeting hers. But you didn't. That tells me there's more to you than your mission. Vexara's gaze flicked away, the words hitting closer to home than she cared to admit. She had always prided herself on her discipline, her unwavering dedication to the Kirin cause. But standing here, in the depths of enemy territory, she couldn't ignore the doubt creeping into her mind. You think you know me, she said, her voice low. But you don't. Maybe not, Elias admitted. But I want to. The simplicity of his statement caught her off guard. There was no arrogance in his tone, no condescension. Just an earnestness that unsettled her more than any weapon ever could. The shadows close in. Before she could respond, a distant rumble shook the chamber, followed by the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the tunnels. Vexera stiffened, her claws extending once more as her sharp senses honed in on the threat. "They're getting closer," she said, her voice taut. Elias nodded, grabbing his rifle and slinging it over his shoulder. "We need to move." They slipped out of the chamber and back into the narrow passageways, their movements synchronized despite the unease lingering between them. The faint glow of flashlights danced on the walls ahead, casting long, shifting shadows. Vexera stopped abruptly, her eyes narrowing.
"There's no way around them."
Elias glanced at her, his expression grim.
"Then we make one."
She tilted her head, intrigued despite herself.
"And how do you propose we do that?"
He pulled a small device from his belt, a compact explosive, its blinking light casting a faint glow in the dim tunnel.
"We draw them to the wrong place." Vexera's lips curled into a sharp grin. "I didn't think humans were this clever." Elias smirked. "We have our moments."
Together, they set the trap, planting the explosive in a narrow choke point before retreating to a safer position.
The explosion, when it came, was deafening, shaking the tunnels and sending a cloud of dust and debris cascading through the air.
As the sound of confused shouts and frantic movement filled the passageway, Vexera glanced at Elias, a flicker of grudging respect in her eyes.
"You're not as useless as I thought."
"I'll take that as a compliment," he said with a wry smile.
A growing bond.
As they moved deeper into the tunnels, Vexera found herself stealing glances at the human beside her. He was unlike anyone she had ever encountered, calm under pressure, resourceful, and strangely, genuine. For all her skepticism, she couldn't deny that he had saved her life more than once. But the doubt still lingered, a shadow in the back of her mind. Could she truly trust him? Or was this alliance nothing more than a fragile truce destined to shatter? The answer, she realized, would come soon enough. For now, all she could do was keep moving and hope that the choices she had made wouldn't lead to her undoing.